The waves have been crashing against the shore of your mind for as long as you can remember. Not the gentle, rhythmic kind, but the chaotic, unpredictable kind, the ones that pull you under with the weight of other people's expectations, that crash over you with the sharp rocks of daily stress, that leave you gasping for air in the quiet moments, wondering when the next surge will hit. You've built sandcastles of achievement, of busyness, of constant motion, hoping they'll hold against the tide, only to watch them dissolve again and again. This is the human condition in the modern sea, a feeling of perpetual reaction, of being a piece of driftwood tossed by forces far beyond your control. But what if I told you there was a different way to exist in this ocean? Not as driftwood, but as a ship. Not a flimsy raft, but a vessel with a deep iron keel, a sturdy helm, and a captain who knows how to read the stars. This isn't a metaphor for ignoring the storm or pretending the waves aren't real. It's about developing a structure of mind so resilient, so fundamentally sound, that the storm becomes simply weather-loud, perhaps inconvenient, but never again catastrophic to your core. This is the promise of Stoicism, not as a dusty, ancient philosophy, but as a living, breathing, operating system for the soul. And it begins not with fighting the ocean, but with understanding the one component you have absolute authority over, your own ship. Our guide on this voyage is a man who knew about being tossed by brutal currents. His name was Epictetus, and he was born a slave in the Roman Empire. His body was owned by another man. His life was not his own. He experienced the ultimate lack of external control, and yet, from that precise crucible of powerlessness, he forged one of the most powerful and enduring philosophies of inner freedom the world has ever known. His central, revolutionary insight was this: we cannot choose our external circumstances, but we can always choose our response to them. The slave mastered the one thing his masters could never touch: his own judgments, his own will, his own inner citadel. His teachings weren't abstract musings. They were survival manuals for the human spirit. And they begin with what we're calling Principle 1, casting your deepest anchor. Before a ship can weather anything, it must know why it's sailing. Aimless vessels are the first to be wrecked. In our lives, this aimlessness manifests as a hollow reactivity. We chase the next promotion, the next compliment, the next distraction. Not because it aligns with a true north, but because the current of society or our own anxious minds pulls us there. We become servants to every passing wind of emotion, every trend, every opinion. Epictetus called this the root of suffering. He said, first, tell yourself what kind of person you want to be. Then do what you have to do. This is the act of casting your anchor. This anchor is your proheresis, your fundamental choice, your core character. It's not a list of goals like get a raise or lose 10 pounds. Those are destinations, and destinations can be destroyed by storms. Your anchor is about who you are while you sail. Is it a person of courage, even when afraid, of justice, even when it's costly, of compassion, even when hurt? This anchor is forged in quiet reflection, in the stillness you must fight to create. Ask yourself, if everything was stripped away, your job, your possessions, your status, what single, non-negotiable principle would you have left? What is the line you will not cross? That line, that principle, is the beginning of your anchor. Let me tell you a story about Marcus, a graphic designer drowning in his own sea. His work was driven by client whims, his mood by their feedback. A positive email would send him soaring. A criticism, even a minor one, would plunge him into days of anxiety and self-doubt. He was the epitome of a reactive vessel, his interior weather perfectly mirroring the external climate of his inbox. He was exhausted. His anchor, he realized, had been pleased everyone. It was an anchor made of gossamer, dissolving at the slightest touch. In a moment of clarity, he went for a long walk and asked himself Epictetus's question. What kind of person did he want to be? The answer that surfaced surprised him. A person of thoughtful craft. Not a people-pleaser, but a craftsman. That was his new anchor. He wrote it down. My anchor, thoughtful craft. The next day, a client sent back a design with harsh notes. The old panic began to rise. But instead of spiraling, Marcus looked at the sentence on his desk. Thoughtful craft, he asked himself, does this feedback, however poorly delivered, contain anything that can improve the craft? He identified one valid point about spacing. He focused on that, made the adjustment, and responded professionally about that specific element, gently steering past the client's anger. The emotional tsunami didn't crash. It lapped against the hull of his new identity and receded. For the first time, he wasn't drowning in the reaction. He was steering through it. His anchor held. He wasn't at the mercy of the client's tone, because his worth was no longer tied to it. His worth was tied to his commitment to the craft. This is the alchemy of Principle 1. It transforms external chaos from a threat to your being into mere data for your navigation. But an anchor alone isn't enough. A ship with a strong anchor but gaping holes in its hull will still sink. The water that sinks us is the incessant, unchecked flow of our own thoughts and impressions. This brings us to Principle 2. Fortifying the hull. Epictetus pictured the mind as a fortress. You are a little soul, he said, carrying around a corpse. A bit grim, but his point was profound. Your precious, conscious self is carrying this vulnerable body through a world of potential disturbances. Your duty is to guard the gates of your fortress. Imagine your senses and your initial, raw impressions as messengers rushing to the gate. They shout news, insult incoming, failure detected, potential embarrassment on the horizon. The untrained, reactive mind throws the gates open wide, lets the messenger in, and immediately declares the news to be truth. It mobilizes the entire garrison, your nervous system, your emotions, your date to fight a threat that hasn't even been properly examined. Guarding the hull is the practice of stopping the messenger at the gate. You say, thank you. Wait here. You examine the impression. This person frowned at my presentation. The impression says, I am incompetent, and everyone sees it. Is that true? Or is it possible they have a headache, or are thinking about their own problems? By pausing, you create a sacred space between event and reaction. In that space lies your freedom. This fortification is a daily, brick-by-brick practice. It starts with the small leaks. You're stuck in traffic. The raw impression is, this is a disaster. My day is ruined. The guarded mind acknowledges, I am stopped in my car. That is all. My judgment that this is a disaster is the optional, suffering-causing part. I can choose to see this as 10 minutes to listen to an audiobook or sit in silence. You are patching a leak. You're waiting in a long line. The raw impression is impatience and frustration. The guarded mind observes the sensation of impatience in the body, notes the story it's telling, this is taking forever, and gently returns to the breath. Another brick laid. This isn't about becoming emotionless. It's about becoming the master of your inner space, rather than a prisoner to every passing squall. It's realizing that while you can't control the ocean, you can absolutely control the integrity of your vessel. The storms will still come, the waves will still be high, but a ship with a true anchor and a fortified hull doesn't fear the weather. It respects it, prepares for it, and knows it has the structure to pass through it. Marcus began this fortification. He started a simple practice, the evening review. Each night, he'd ask himself 2 questions. Where did I let an unexamined impression breach my walls today? And where did I successfully guard the gate? He saw a pattern. The messenger of your behind on your work would often be admitted without question, triggering a whole night of anxiety. He started stopping that messenger. I have a certain amount of work. Being anxious about its quantity doesn't reduce it. It only poisons my time. What is the single next action? The hull grew stronger, but now a new challenge loomed. Marcus had his anchor and was strengthening his hull, yet the ocean is full of other ships. Some fire warning shots, some try to board, some shout conflicting directions. How do you navigate a world where other people's actions, words, and judgments are constant variables? This is where our voyage enters more complex waters, where the principles of the inner citadel meet the chaos of human interaction. For it's one thing to guard against your own runaway thoughts, it's another to stand firm when the attack seems to come from outside, from a person whose words feel like a direct assault on your newly built deck. That feeling of an external attack, the harsh word from a colleague, the dismissive comment from a family member. The public criticism that hits like a cold wave, this is where philosophy meets the pavement of our daily lives. You've been building your inner fortress, fortifying the hull of your mind against your own chaotic thoughts. But now, a projectile seems to have been launched from another ship entirely, arcing through the air, aimed directly at your deck. The instinct is universal. Flinch, raise your own weapons, return fire. We are wired for reciprocity, for defense. But what if that instinct is the very leak that sinks us? What if the true power lies not in deflecting the arrow, but in deciding, long before it's ever fired, that you are no longer a target? This brings us to the heart of Principle 3, becoming the archer, not the target. Epictetus offered a paradigm shift so radical it can feel unnatural at first. He said, remember, it is not the person who insults you or attacks you who harms you, but your opinion that these people are harming you. Sit with that for a moment. The harm, the sting, the disruption, it's not in the event itself, but in the judgment you attach to it. The arrow, in a very real sense, is made of your own perceptions. When someone calls you foolish, the raw data is a sound wave. Your judgment, I have been diminished, my worth is under attack, is the forge that turns that sound into a piercing weapon. The Stoic archer learns to disarm the attack by refusing to supply that judgment. How does this work in practice? It begins with a simple, powerful differentiation. The sphere of what is mine and what is not mine. Another person's opinion, their mood, their words, their actions, these belong firmly in the realm of not mine. They are part of the external ocean. Your judgment, your reaction, your internal peace, these are mine. The moment you accept that the opinion of another is not mine, you withdraw the fuel that feeds the fire of your own outrage. The insult, like a wave, washes against your hull and passes. It cannot get inside unless you open a hatch for it. Let's return to Marcus. Having found his anchor in thoughtful craft and practicing to guard his mind, he faced his first real external test. He presented a major campaign concept to his team. A new manager, Leo, known for his blunt style, listened intently and then said, "This feels derivative. I've seen this aesthetic 100 times before. We need something that actually stands out." The old Marcus would have felt the heat rise to his face. His inner narrative would have screamed, "He thinks I'm unoriginal. He's undermining me in front of everyone. My career here is over." The arrow would have struck, and he would have either shrunk into silence or reacted with defensive anger. But the new Marcus, the one building his Stoic ship, felt the initial jolt, the raw impression, and then he paused. He visualized the sphere. Leo's opinion, is that mine to control? No, it is not mine. It is external weather. He visualized his own deck. My reaction, my professional response, my commitment to thoughtful craft, that is mine. In that split-second space, the arrow lost its velocity. It became data, not a death blow. Marcus took a breath and responded, "Thank you for that perspective, Leo. Can you point to a specific element that feels familiar so I can understand the concern better? My goal is to ensure the final product is distinct." He didn't agree or disagree. He didn't counterattack. He simply engaged with the content from the deck of his own craft, not from the emotional quicksand of feeling attacked. The meeting moved on. Later, Marcus reflected. Leo's comment hadn't ruined his day. He realized Leo might have been having a bad day, or might have a different visual reference point. More importantly, Marcus saw that his peace of mind had remained intact because he hadn't handed it over to Leo. He had remained the archer, in control of his own aim and his own stance, rather than a target flinching at every shot. This is the profound freedom of Principle 3. You reclaim an immense amount of energy previously spent on monitoring, fearing, and reacting to the opinions of others. However, the ocean of human interaction is not just about direct criticism. Sometimes the offense is subtler, more corrosive. A friend forgets an important promise. A partner makes a careless remark that echoes an old insecurity. A stranger treats you with disrespect. This is the territory of Principle for transforming the poison of offense. Here, Stoicism offers one of its most powerful mental alchemies, the ability to reframe an obstacle into fuel, an offense into training. Marcus encountered this in a personal realm. He had planned a weekend hiking trip with his friend Sam for months, a much-needed escape. The night before, Sam cancelled, citing a vague work thing that Marcus suspected was just fatigue. The raw impression was sharp disappointment, edged with betrayal. He doesn't value our time. My planning was wasted. I'm not a priority. The old story began to play. But Marcus applied his Stoic tools. First, guard the gate. The fact is, Sam cancelled. My story about his reasons and my worth is my addition. Second, sphere of control. Sam's choices are not mine. My choice of response is. Then he applied the specific alchemy of Principle 4. Epictetus advised, every obstacle, every offense is an opportunity to practice a virtue. This wasn't a platitude. It was a practical reframing tool. Marcus asked himself, what virtue can I practice here? The answer came, patience and understanding. Instead of firing off a hurt text, he called Sam. He said, I was really looking forward to it, but I understand things come up. Is everything okay with work? In that conversation, he learned Sam was genuinely overwhelmed with a family issue he was too embarrassed to mention. The offense dissolved, replaced by connection. Marcus had transformed the poison of perceived neglect into the medicine of strengthened friendship. Even if Sam had been simply lazy, Marcus's practice of patience would have strengthened his own character, making him less vulnerable to such petty wins in the future. This is the secret. When you train yourself to see every slight, every inconvenience, every frustration as a sparring partner for your virtues, a chance to practice patience, courage, justice, or temperance, the entire world becomes your gym. The offensive person is no longer a tormentor. They are an unskilled, unwilling personal trainer, handing you the weight you need to grow stronger. This reframe is a superpower. It means nothing, and no one can truly offend you without your conscious cooperation. You hold the formula to transform their lead into your gold, but Marcus's voyage was not destined for calm seas. A storm was brewing that would test the integrity of his entire vessel. A senior creative director role opened up, a position he had quietly coveted for years. He applied, poured his soul into his presentation, and felt he had performed well. The decision came down to him and a talented external candidate. The day the announcement was made, the CEO gathered the team. The role was offered to the outsider. The public reason given was a desire for fresh perspective. This was no single arrow. This was a broadside. All of Marcus's old demons roared back. Imposter syndrome. Years of work overlooked. Public humiliation. The anchor of thoughtful craft felt like it was dragging through mud. What was the point of craft if it wasn't recognized? The fortified hull of his mind groaned under the pressure of these massive waves of thought. He smiled stiffly, congratulated the new hire, and returned to his desk, feeling the foundations of his new Stoic self shaking. He had mastered small squalls, but this was a hurricane. The principles felt like theoretical words against the gale force wind of raw disappointment and shame. He left work early, not to practice a virtue, but to retreat. He sat in his apartment, the silence loud with failure. This is the critical moment in any transformation, the moment when the old, familiar, painful self says, "See, I told you it wouldn't work." This philosophy is for people who don't want things badly enough. Your anchor is fake. Your hull is paper. It is the darkest hour before the integration of wisdom. Marcus faced a choice: to let the storm dismantle the ship he'd built, or to discover if it could truly hold in deep water. He opened his notebook, not to his task list, but to the blank page. And he began to write, not as a designer, but as a captain assessing damage in the midst of the gale. He was about to be forced to apply the most challenging principles yet, ones that dealt not with external arrows, but with the monsters that lived in the hold of his own ship, the ghosts of fear and the weight of shame. The notebook page stared back at Marcus, a vast white emptiness mirroring the hollow feeling in his chest. The storm of disappointment wasn't passing. It had anchored itself inside him, turning into a cold, dense fog of shame. This was different from guarding against a critic's arrow or transforming a friend's slight. This was an internal climate change. The voice wasn't Leo's or Sam's. It was his own, and it was merciless. You were never good enough. You fooled yourself with this thoughtful craft nonsense. Everyone saw your ambition, and everyone now sees your failure. You are, and always will be, a step behind. This is where many voyages toward peace end, not on the dramatic rocks of external disaster, but in the silent, sucking quicksand of our own inner narratives. Marcus was facing the twin specters that Epictetus named as the ultimate internal tyrants: fear and shame. And Principle 5 is their antidote, dragging the monsters into the light. Stoicism makes a startling claim. Fear and shame are not facts of the world, but artifacts of the mind. They are not what is, but what we tell ourselves about what is. Epictetus said, "Man is disturbed not by things, but by the views he takes of them." The event, not getting the promotion, was a neutral fact. The stories Marcus was weaving around it: I am a fraud. My future is bleak. I am humiliated were the sources of his suffering. These stories felt like undeniable truths, but the Stoic practice is to treat them as hypotheses to be investigated. Sitting there, Marcus remembered a technique from his reading, hypothera, the practice of self-interrogation. He began to write, not his feelings, but questions and answers. Q. What is the absolute worst thing that has happened here? A. I did not get a specific job title. Q. Does that fact mean my thoughtful craft anchor is false? A. No, my craft exists independently of a title. I can choose to deepen it without the title. Q. What am I truly afraid of? A. Being stuck, being seen as mediocre, never progressing. Q. Is that future a certainty or a story I'm telling? A. It is a story. The only certainty is this moment, and in this moment I am capable of my craft. Q. What is the source of my shame? A. The story that everyone is judging me as I am judging myself. Q. Is their judgment within my control? Is my self-judgment serving me? A. Theirs is not. Mine is currently a poison, not a tool. By dragging the vague, terrifying monsters of failure and shame into the specific, well-lit room of written inquiry, they lost their mythical power. They became manageable problems, not existential threats. He saw that his fear was of a phantom future, and his shame was a story he was broadcasting onto others. The act of writing it down created the crucial space between himself and his thoughts. He was not the storm. He was the observer of the storm. And for an observer, even the fiercest storm is a temporary spectacle. This didn't magically erase the hurt. Stoicism isn't numbness. It felt like applying a clean, cold compress to a burn. The pain was still there, but the inflammation of catastrophic thinking began to recede. He realized his anchor hadn't broken. It had been pulling against the immense, illusory weight of his own fearful projections. Once he identified those projections as mere thoughts, the anchor held firm again. He was still a craftsman. The world hadn't ended. It had simply changed course. But Marcus was a quick learner. If his own mind could generate such paralyzing stories about a single event, what other unseen storms might lie over the horizon? Waiting to be blindsided by the next crisis felt like a form of helplessness. This is where he stumbled upon and began to practice. Principle 6. Charting the unseen rockstar discipline of negative visualization premeditatio malorum. This Stoic exercise is often misunderstood as pessimism. It is, in fact, the ultimate optimism, the optimism of preparedness. It is the deliberate, calm practice of envisioning potential challenges or losses, not to dwell in fear, but to disarm them of their surprise and terror. A captain doesn't ignore charts of dangerous reefs. They study them so they can sail with confidence. Marcus started to apply this to his professional life. He would spend 5 minutes in the morning before checking his email, mentally walking through potential difficulties. He would visualize, what if my biggest client cancels today? He wouldn't just picture the disaster. He'd mentally rehearse his response. I would feel initial panic. I would then breathe. I would assess my financial runway. I would begin strategizing outreach to new clients, leaning on my network. I would remember that my craft is not dependent on this one client. By mentally visiting this possibility, he inoculated himself against its psychological shock. If it happened, his first thought would not be, my world is ending, but this is the scenario I prepared for. Time to execute the plan. He applied it personally. What if I face another public rejection? His mental rehearsal. I will feel the sting. I will excuse myself. I will find a private space and practice my self-interrogation. I will return to my anchor. I will not let it define my week. This practice did not attract misfortune. It built psychic calluses. It transformed the unknown future from a haunted house of fears into a landscape of managed possibilities. He was no longer a passive passenger hoping for calm seas. He was an active navigator preparing for all seasons. This combination dissolving present fears through inquiry and defanging future fears through visualization forged in Marcus a new kind of resilience. But resilience is not the end goal of Stoicism. It is the foundation for the true goal. Virtuous action, and action requires a clear, unimpeded source of power. This brings us to the cornerstone. Principle 7. The unshakable, helm your sovereign reaction. Everything Marcus had learned culminated here. The anchor of purpose, the fortified hull of guarded impressions, the archer's stance against criticism, the alchemy of transforming offenses, the interrogation of fear, the preparation for adversity, all of it was to secure this one ultimate territory, the freedom to choose his reaction. Epictetus's most famous line is the compass here. It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. Marcus began to see his consciousness as the helm of his ship. External events were the wind and waves. For years, he had let the wind spin the helm wildly, and then cursed the storm for his nausea. Now, he was learning to grip the helm firmly. The wind might howl a lost promotion, but the set of the helm, his chosen perspective and subsequent action, was his. This is the essence of agency. He saw this play out in small ways daily. The coffee shop getting his order wrong was no longer a ruined morning. It was a minor wind shift. He could choose the reaction of irritation, or the reaction of gentle correction, or the reaction of amused acceptance. The choice was his. A project delay was not a catastrophe. It was a changing current. He could choose panic, or he could choose to reprioritize other tasks. The helm was his. This sovereignty over his inner world began to radiate outward. Colleagues noticed a new steadiness in him. In meetings, when tensions rose, Marcus wasn't adding to the emotional turbulence. He was the one who could calmly ask, "What's the problem we're really trying to solve?" He had become, without realizing it, a source of stability for others. His ship wasn't just surviving. It was becoming a vessel others wanted to sail near. Yet, with this newfound power came a new responsibility. A captain with a steady helm must also know when to reef the sails, when to slow down, when not to act. The constant pressure to react, to respond, to produce, to consume, this was a tempest of its own. To navigate it, he would need to master Principle 8. The power of the pause, deliberate restraint, and he would get a profound lesson in this, not from a professional setback, but from a personal temptation that would test the very core of his character. It began a month after the promotion disappointment. Marcus was feeling stronger, more centered than ever. His work was sharp. Then, during a competitive pitch for a luxury brand account, he stumbled upon some intelligence. An old friend, now at a rival agency, left a confidential strategy deck open on his laptop during a casual coffee meetup. Marcus saw it over his shoulder, key pricing, creative angles, the works. His friend went to the restroom, and the document glowed on the screen. The wind of opportunity, a gale force wind, suddenly blew. Here was a chance to not just win, but to dominate. To erase the sting of his recent loss with a spectacular, guaranteed victory. The old Marcus, the reactive one, might have snapped a photo without a second thought. The new Marcus felt the lure, the incredible pull of it, but he also felt the helm in his hands. This was no longer about guarding against offense or fear. This was about who he was at the deepest level when no one was watching. The pause between seeing the document and making a choice felt like an eternity. In that eternity, he would have to decide what kind of ship he truly commanded. The glow from the laptop screen seemed to pulse in the quiet cafe, a siren song of certainty in an uncertain profession. Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs, a primitive drumbeat of opportunity. The noise of the cafe faded into a distant hum. Every instinct, every ingrained habit of a competitive industry screamed at him, "Look, remember, this is how you win. This is how you show them." The ghost of the lost promotion whispered of redemption. It would be so easy. A glance, a memorized figure, a strategic insight. No one would ever know. The old Marcus, the one who defined himself by external victories and feared external judgments, was already reaching for his phone, but then his hand stopped. Not because of fear of getting caught, but because of a sudden, visceral awareness of the helm in his grasp. This was the moment of Principle 8 in its purest, most demanding form. The power of the paused deliberate restraint. Epictetus had said, "If you are tempted by any external thing, remember that it is not the thing itself that draws you, but your judgment of it." The temptation wasn't in the pixels on the screen. It was in his judgment that this shortcut was the key to his worth, his security, his revenge on past disappointment. He closed his eyes for a second, not to pray, but to consult his inner citadel. He ran the Stoic tests. Is this action just? No. It was theft, even if undetected. Is it courageous? True courage was winning by his own craft, not by stolen intelligence. Does it align with my anchor of thoughtful craft? It was the opposite. It was thoughtless predation. Is this within my control? His choice was. The content of that document was not. He opened his eyes. The document was still there, but its power over him was gone. It was just light on a screen, belonging to someone else. When his friend returned, Marcus had deliberately shifted his chair and was looking out the window. "You might want to close that deck," he said casually, nodding toward the laptop. "Cafes are full of hungry eyes." His friend, startled, quickly minimized the window and thanked him. The moment passed. Marcus had not acted. He had exercised restraint, and in doing so, he experienced a surge of a new kind of power. Not power over others, but power over himself. It was a quiet, profound victory that no client win could ever match. He had proven to himself that his inner fortress could hold against even the most seductive of sieges. He left the cafe feeling lighter, stronger, and more internally congruent than he had in years. The pitch for the luxury brand proceeded. Marcus's team worked from their own creativity, their own research, their own thoughtful craft. They lost. The rival agency, his friend's agency, won. When the news came, Marcus felt a twinge of the old what if, but it was faint, overshadowed by a deep, solid respect for himself. He had lost a battle, but he had fortified his soul. He realized that every act of restraint was a deposit into an inner bank account of integrity, and the interest it paid was unshakable self-trust. This experience led him directly into the heart of Principle 9, the art of wise acceptance simul, 40. This Stoic concept, later championed by Nietzsche, means a love of one's fate. It is not passive resignation, the sigh of the defeated. It is active, dynamic acceptance. It is looking at every facet of reality, especially the difficult, painful, or disappointing parts, and saying, "This is what happened. This is the raw material I have been given. Now, how do I work with it?" Marcus had been fighting his fate since the lost promotion. He'd been mentally arguing with reality, an exhausting and futile game. Acceptance meant dropping the rope in that tug of war. He sat down and consciously accepted the facts. He did not get the promotion. He did not win the luxury brand pitch. These were the coordinates on his map. Fighting these facts was like a captain raging against the latitude and longitude of a storm. It was pointless. Acceptance was the act of marking them on the chart and then asking the only productive question. Given this reality, what is the best course forward? This shifted his entire energy from lamenting what was not to engaging with what was. He accepted that his career path had changed. Instead of forcing his way up a corporate ladder that now seemed shaky, he asked, "What can I build where I am?" He began mentoring a junior designer, finding unexpected joy in teaching. He accepted the loss of the pitch and analyzed his team's genuine strengths and weaknesses without the filter of bitterness. He saw they were brilliant at narrative branding, but weak on rapid, trendy visual execution. This was a useful, actionable insight, not a wound. Amor fati meant finding the hidden gift in the setback. The promotion loss forced him to define success on his own terms, not the company's. The pitch loss validated his commitment to ethics and clarified his team's true niche. He began to see his life not as a series of successes and failures, but as a curriculum, where the hardest lessons were the most important credits. He was learning to love the journey itself, wind and waves included, because it was his journey, and it was forging him into someone he respected. This clear-eyed acceptance of reality naturally flowed into the 10th and culminating principle, living in accordance with nature. To the Stoics, nature had two meanings: the wider cosmos and, most importantly, human nature. To live in accordance with nature meant to live rationally and socially, to fulfill your unique potential as a conscious, cooperative being. Marcus started to audit his life through this lens. Was his daily routine in accordance with his rational nature? He saw that constant digital distraction fragmented his focus, making him reactive. He began scheduling deep work blocks, honoring his nature as a thinker and creator. Was his lifestyle aligned with nature? He spent more time walking in the park, less time in artificially lit entertainment complexes, feeling more grounded and less anxious. The social aspect was crucial. Human nature is communal. Epictetus, though emphasizing self-sufficiency, taught that we are born for community. Marcus evaluated his relationships. Were they based on mutual growth and virtue, or on gossip, complaint, and empty networking? He began investing time in people who challenged him to be better, and he sought to be a source of calm and support, not drama. He practiced the Stoic concept of sympatheia, interconnectedness of all people. When frustrated with a slow-moving colleague, he'd remind himself, this person is my fellow human, struggling with their own battles, deserving of my patience as I deserve theirs. This didn't mean being a doormat, but it did mean approaching conflicts with a default of understanding rather than antagonism. He also began to see his work as a social contribution. Thoughtful craft wasn't just for his portfolio, it was a service. A well-designed public health poster could save lives. A clear, beautiful interface could reduce someone's daily frustration. His craft was his way to participate in the human project. This gave his days a dignity that transcended paychecks or praise. Months passed, the seasons changed. Marcus was not a different man, but a more integrated one. The principles were no longer tools he picked up in crisis. They were the very beams and planks of his daily experience. He still felt stress, disappointment, and anger, but they were now like weather patterns in his inner sky. They arose. He observed them without complete identification, and they passed. His default state was no longer anxiety. It was a watchful, engaged calm. Then, the ultimate test of his new architecture arrived. It came not as a professional blow, but as a personal cataclysm. His father, his last remaining parent, suffered a severe stroke. Marcus was on a plane within hours, arriving at the hospital to find a once vigorous man rendered fragile and half-paralyzed, his speech slurred, his future a landscape of uncertainty and long, hard rehabilitation. This was the real storm. All the practiced scenarios, the guarded impressions, the transformed offenses, they seemed like kindergarten exercises before this raw, aching reality. The fear was physical. The potential loss was oceanic. For the first night, Marcus simply sat in the hospital chair, holding his father's hand, feeling the old, reactive panic threaten to swallow him whole. The anchor felt miles away, but as dawn broke, casting a pale light on the hospital room, the training took over. He didn't fight the fear. He applied Principle 5. He wrote in his journal, "What is the worst that can happen? My father could die. That is the natural order of life. However painful, what is within my control? My presence, the quality of my care for him, my advocacy with doctors, my own health so I can be strong for him." He dragged the monster into the light. He practiced Principle 6, negative visualization, not to torture himself, but to prepare. He envisioned the long rehab, the financial strain, the emotional toll. By envisioning it, he robbed the unknown future of its terror and began to make practical plans. Most of all, he leaned on Principle 9, acceptance. He had to accept a brutal, unwanted new reality. This was his fate and his father's. Fighting it would only drain the energy needed for care. He accepted the diagnosis. He accepted the changed future. And then, from that solid ground of acceptance, he began to act with clear, purposeful love. He arranged medical transfers. He researched the best rehab facilities. He became his father's calm, determined champion. Through it all, he lived Principle 10. He cared for his own nature by ensuring he ate and slept. He fulfilled his social nature by reaching out to his community, accepting help, and coordinating with family. He saw his role not as a tragic hero, but as a son, performing a fundamental human duty with as much grace and reason as he could muster. One evening, weeks into the ordeal, his father, through immense effort, managed to say a clear sentence: "You are steady." In that moment, Marcus understood everything. The Stoic journey wasn't about becoming invulnerable. It was about becoming reliable, for yourself and for others. His father, in his vulnerability, needed a rock, not another wave of emotion. Marcus had become that, not by denying feeling, but by mastering his reactions so that his deepest virtues, love, duty, patience, could take the helm. He returned home weeks later, exhausted but not shattered. The crisis was ongoing, but he was navigating it. His work had been on hold, his life appended. He walked into his quiet apartment, the familiar space now feeling like a past life. He sat at his desk, looking out at the city lights. He had faced the deepest waters and his ship had held. But now, he had to return to the world of deadlines and ambitions. A world that suddenly seemed both smaller and strangely different. He had survived the gale, but could he now thrive in the calm? Could the profound lessons of the crisis translate back into the mundane tapestry of daily life? He was about to find out as the final phase of his transformation from surviving to flourishing began. The silence of his apartment was no longer an empty space to be filled with noise, but a reservoir of clarity. Marcus stood at his window, looking at the city's nocturnal pulse, the streaming headlights. The distant glow of Windows End felt a profound sense of return, yet he was utterly changed. He had navigated the gale. His father was on the long, difficult road of recovery, and Marcus had found a rhythm of care. But now, he faced the most subtle test of all, the ordinary. Could the profound lessons carved by crisis survive the slow, grinding wheel of daily routine? Could Stoicism be a philosophy not just for survival, but for genuine flourishing? This is where the journey transitions from building the ship to sailing it with purpose. The first days back at work were a study in dissonance. The office hummed with a frantic energy that now felt foreign. A colleague was in a state over a changed font choice. Another was preening over a minor compliment from a superior. Marcus observed it all with a detached compassion. He wasn't judging them. He was recognizing his former self in them. He saw how much suffering was self-inflicted, born from handing the helm of one's inner peace to the fickle winds of external validation. He returned to his desk, not with ambition, but with duty. duty to his craft and to his own nature. He opened his project management software and did something radical. He deleted half the self-imposed, anxiety-driven deadlines. He kept only the ones essential for the team. He then blocked 3-hour stretches on his calendar for deep craft. He was applying Principle 10 living according to his rational nature by designing a workday that honored his capacity for focused creation, not just reactive busyness. His first meeting was a project post-mortem for a campaign that had underperformed. The room was tense, thick with the scent of blame-seeking. The sales lead pointed at marketing. Marketing pointed at the creative concept. The old Marcus would have bristled, defended his team's work, and gotten lost in the crossfire. The new Marcus waited for a pause. He then spoke, not to defend, but to analyze. "It seems we're all trying to figure out what happened," he said, his voice calm. "Blame is a storm that sinks all ships. Let's accept the result. The numbers are the numbers. That's our shared reality. Now, from that place of acceptance, let's ask, what can we learn? Was our message aligned with the true need? Did our creative assumptions miss the mark?" He had applied Principle 9 acceptance to create a neutral, productive space. The energy in the room shifted from defensive to curious. He wasn't avoiding responsibility. He was steering the collective mind toward reason. By the end, they had a list of learnings, not scapegoats. His boss pulled him aside later. "You've changed," she said. "You've become the calm in the room we didn't know we needed." This was the unexpected fruit of his practice. Influence, not the loud, aggressive influence of ego, but the magnetic influence of stability. People began to seek his counsel. A junior designer, Anna, came to him near tears after a harsh review. Instead of joining in condemnation of the manager, Marcus guided her through the Stoic steps. First, he said, separate the fact from the story. The fact is, he said, the color palette was uninspired. The story you're telling is, I'm a bad designer, which is true. He helped her see the judgment as external, an arrow she could choose to let fall. Then, he applied the alchemy. Okay, so take the fact, the critique of the palette, and ask, is there a virtue to practice here? Maybe open-mindedness. Let's look at the palette again, not as a personal failure, but as a puzzle for your craft. He was passing on the tools, not just fixing the problem. In doing so, he was fulfilling his social nature, contributing to the community of his workplace. Months flowed into a year. Marcus's external life evolved, but not in the frantic, grasping way of his past. He was offered and accepted a role leading a small, experimental, creative team, a role built around mentorship and innovation, not hierarchy. It was a natural extension of his character. His relationship with his father deepened in ways unimaginable before the stroke. Their conversations were slower, simpler, and infinitely more precious. Marcus practiced presence, accepting each moment with his father as a complete gift, not marred by fears of the future. He also began to understand the Stoic concept of amor fati, the love of fate on a cellular level. He didn't just accept the past year's trials, he felt a genuine gratitude for them. The lost promotion had freed him from a narrow ladder. The ethical test in the cafe had solidified his integrity. His father's illness had taught him about love's true, non-transactional nature. He saw his life as a unique tapestry, where the dark threads were essential for the beauty and depth of the whole picture. He was no longer at war with his own story. One spring afternoon, he was walking in the park, a practice that had become his moving meditation. He watched a willow tree, its long branches swaying gracefully in a strong wind. It didn't resist the wind. It didn't become rigid and snap. It bent, it flowed, it moved with the force, its roots firm in the earth. In that moment, he had a final, crystallizing insight. This was the visual metaphor for everything. The Stoic wasn't an oak, rigid and prone to breaking in a hurricane. The Stoic was the willow. The principles were the deep, flexible root system. The wind was life, the promotions, the losses, the criticisms, the illnesses, the joys. The art was in the sway, in the resilient, non-resistant flow, always returning to center. He realized the ultimate goal was not a state of unfeeling rigidity, but a state of eudaimonia, flourishing life of vitality and virtue. The peace he had was not the peace of a stagnant pond, but the dynamic peace of a deep, clear river, moving with purpose, capable of navigating any terrain. He felt joy, not as a fleeting reaction to good news, but as a background condition of engaged, purposeful living. The narrative of his life had been rewritten. He was no longer the protagonist buffeted by plot twists, desperate for a happy ending. He was the author, the narrator, and the protagonist, writing each day with the ink of his choices, guided by the principles that had become as natural as breathing. On the one-year anniversary of his father's stroke, he visited him. His father was now able to walk with a cane, his speech clearer. They sat in the garden. His father looked at him, his eyes sharp. "You know," he said slowly, deliberately, "when I got sick, I saw you become a man. Not the man I thought you'd be. Better. A man who knows how to carry weight." Marcus felt a swell of emotion, but it didn't overwhelm him. It flowed through him, clean and clear. He simply nodded, placing his hand over his father's. "I had good teachers," he said, "and a good example." That night, Marcus finally closed the first journal he'd started in the depths of his crisis. On the final page, he wrote a summary, not for himself, but as a message he might share one day. The journey is not about making the world stop affecting you. That is impossible. It is about changing what affect means. An affect is no longer a command that controls you. It is a weather pattern that passes through the sky of your awareness. The storm is not your enemy. It is the teacher of your seamanship. The goal is not a safe harbor where you dock forever, but the skill and the courage to sail in any water, to find meaning in the voyage itself, and to help others navigate their own seas. You build your ship through daily practice. The anchor of purpose, the hull of guarded perception, the stance of the archer, the alchemy of offense, the interrogation of fear, the vision of preparation, the sovereignty of reaction, the power of the pause, the grace of acceptance, and the harmony of living naturally. This is how you become unshakable. Not because nothing can touch you, but because everything that touches you is met with a conscious, virtuous, and resilient response. You are not a victim of the ocean. You are a sailor, and the whole sea is your home. He put down the pen. The story, his story, was complete, yet eternally ongoing. He had found the philosophy for the soul, and he had learned to set his sail.